Hey there, Mama. You're listening to the Lift the Shame podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, mama of 5 and your family's intuitive eating dietitian, here to help you cut through the diet culture clutter so you can enjoy freedom with food as a family. I'm on a mission to help you end the generational legacy of diet culture in your home so you can experience motherhood free from food guilt and body shame. Listen in weekly for guidance on how you can ditch diet culture, heal your relationship with food and your body, and confidently raise intuitive eaters. Let's dive in and lift the shame together. Hey Mama, welcome back to the show. I am so glad that you're here as always, just to join me for these conversations as we really look at the secret, unexpected places where diet culture still lurks and work together to separate these parts of diet culture from our family because it can show up in the most unexpected ways, really. And this month we started a new series on health, particularly what that looks like and means for us and for our kids. Because let me tell you, diet culture has a lot to say about what health means. And unfortunately, those skewed ideas of health really can come into play in how we interact with our kids and how we approach food in our families. And I know that you want to be the one to shift this generational legacy of diet culture in your family. And that really starts by challenging these old ideas, these old narratives of food and body, and health is a big one, right? And I see this lurking a lot right now, especially this time of year where it's January, people are looking for a fresh start, and oftentimes that involves dieting in some shape or form. And when it comes to feeding kids, it may not be as obvious as, let's say, someone trying to encourage you to jump on the latest fad diet, right? However, diet culture does have a way of permeating the way we think about food with our kids. And sometimes those things can stem from an old narrative that we still carry within ourselves, from our upbringing, from the way that we were influenced, especially when it comes to our thoughts and perception about health. And so we are taking some time just to kind of unpack all the layers involved with these ideas of health. And I really just want to give you some things to think about when it comes to approaching health with your own kids, because I know that you just want to support your children in building a healthy relationship with food and their bodies. And even that term and that phrase can have so much nuance that, I really just want to be this place to explore that more with you. And so last week we talked a little bit, just as an introduction, about diet culture's perception of health versus all the different nuances about health that diet culture really doesn't encompass when it talks about or promotes health ideas. And we are especially challenged, I think, as millennial parents or just parents in this day and age in general, where we are saturated with so much information overload. It is literally everywhere. And I mean, even just like on Instagram, you can follow so many different kinds of parenting experts and, therapists and counselors and sleeping coaches. And, it's all there and it's all accessible. However, sometimes we don't realize the overwhelm that we're feeling or how other people's ideas influence our perception of what we think we should be doing within our own family. And even subconsciously, I think sometimes it can cause us to drift away from what we value or what we hope to work towards in our own families, especially when it comes to our culture and our homes around food and bodies. And so I'm hopeful that just some of this dialogue or some of these conversations around health that we'll be having this month can just help you dissect some of that more and clear out the clutter and really just kind of hold fast to the truths that resonate with you. Again, it's never too late to rewrite the narrative around food and bodies in your home. And this is certainly a big part of it. Another challenge I think that's really apparent for us as parents today is the enmeshment of wellness culture with diet culture. And sometimes I think that's what can make it so difficult to discern where diet culture is actually lurking, because so much of diet culture has been repackaged and repurposed to look like wellness, like, oh, you are doing X, Y, and Z for your health, and therefore, it's a good thing. However, it's really important to, again, like get to the root of whatever it is, whether it's like a feeding approach with our kids or something that we're trying for ourselves, like to really get at the heart of what some of these things are and ask ourselves, like, are these things like causing stress, like undue stress on my mental health and wellness, or on the way that I think my kids should be eating, or in my interactions with my children? And this is something that I've seen happen a lot. And I've been having a lot of conversations with many of you about this, about just the stress and the impact of what we think we need to do to raise healthy kids versus like what we are actually doing. And again, that gap can feel so distressing sometimes, like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing a good enough job, or I feel like a failure as a mom. And so I really am hoping that through this series, we can continue to challenge some of those myths and really just find those spots where diet culture is lurking, so you can just kick it out of your home and really just come back to your values and feel confident in the things that you're doing at home. And for today's topic, I wanted to chat a little bit about this idea of teaching nutrition to kids, because I've been seeing this come up a lot, and I've heard many of you ask this question too, like, is this something that I should be doing to, support my kids in learning about health, or being able to identify like what's healthy for them or what's not healthy for them when it comes to food or their bodies? And this is a big question, and there's a lot of layers underneath this, as I'm sure you can imagine. And, I think this pops up in different ways too, because again, as I alluded, we see a lot of different things like on Instagram or social media about what we should be doing when it comes to raising our children. And on kid food Instagram, which is kind of how I describe the general world out there on social media that prescribes a certain way of engaging our kids around food. There's this idea, and I've seen a lot of posts about this too, about like ways to talk to your kids about food, or ways to talk to your kids about vegetables to get them to like eating vegetables. And please hear me out when I say, I hope you can hear my heart through this series and through this conversation, that there is absolutely no judgment here whatsoever. Like, there is so much compassion. I have so much compassion for all of us as we navigate a world that's saturated in diet culture, and navigating how to feed our kids and support them in building a positive relationship with food, while our world is still very much weight-centric and focused on different proponents of diet culture that make it really hard sometimes to differentiate like what's helpful versus what's harmful. And so I understand that a lot of these approaches that are prescribed or recommended when it comes to feeding kids or raising kids are done with very good intention. I totally get that. And I also just want to invite you to look at potential impact. And this is something that I've heard from many of you in conversation and had discussions with you about. And I've certainly have my own lived experience with this too, where nutrition facts were presented at a young age with good intention, and it had more of a harmful impact than good. And there's different reasons for that. And that's something that I want to explore on today's episode with you. And again, I understand that these approaches or the things that I'm talking about that you might hear me speaking of are very counterintuitive and very countercultural, right? So I just want to encourage you again to listen with an open mind, and of course, continue the conversation. If you have questions that come up as you're listening to some of the things that I'm describing, I would love for you to write them down, send me an email, let's talk about them, because I know that some of these things may challenge, again, old narratives and old notions or ideas that you've had about health or raising kids or feeding kids. And I also know that you're curious about changing those mindsets, or changing or adapting those beliefs to better support your kids in building a more positive relationship with food. And so one thing I wanted to start with here is this idea of teaching kids about nutrition. And I know that this may vary depending on age. And today I'm just going to be talking about it from a more general perspective. And I hope in the future that, I can narrow it down a little bit, like when it comes to younger school age versus older school age or pre-adolescent or adolescent, because I do think that this subject or approach can certainly change or evolve as your child grows up. Generally, though, when it comes to this idea of teaching kids about nutrition, my stance on it is somewhat the same. And so I will just be speaking about it more generally today. But one thing I want to entangle first here is why. Why do we feel the need to teach kids about nutrition? And I think it's so interesting to explore this and just look at the history of it, because certainly like nutrition facts have not been around forever, right? Like humans existed way before nutrition facts ever came on the scene. That is for sure. Or nutrition science, right? And certainly humans have lived without that knowledge, without the knowledge of, oh, this is how many calories are in this piece of food that I'm eating, right? And so I always like to go back to this question of why do we feel the need to teach kids about nutrition in the first place? And if you have ever thought about this question, or if you've ever wondered about, should I teach my kids about like basic nutrition facts or health information, or talk about foods like, these foods are healthy or these foods are not healthy, my question always will go back to why do we feel the need to do that? And again, I'm speaking generally. A lot of this is just my own anecdotal evidence and observations that I've had just from, moms like you that I've worked with before. Oftentimes, what I find is lurking underneath the surface here is a hidden agenda. And hidden agendas can evolve from our own fears or our own distress that we have around our child's body size, around our child's appetite, around the way they're eating. And sometimes we may subconsciously kind of project that on them or feel like we are more in control of a situation when we can interject in our own way. And sometimes sharing nutrition facts or sharing nutrition information is done from that place of fear or control. And again, like if you have had a tumultuous relationship with food in your body, and I'm raising my hand because I'm right there with you, I will tell you that there will be things that surface in your motherhood journey that can make you feel uncomfortable simply because of your own history around food and your body. And something that I see as like a common theme, and I've certainly experienced this myself too, is, we can have like this innate fear that our kids can't really be trusted to eat what they need to support their overall health. And I think that's somewhat at the heart of it, where we feel like, I don't know, like if I left my kids to their own devices, like, could they truly self-regulate and eat what they need? And, this is a big proponent of intuitive eating. And, basically like we're offering our kids food and we're trusting them to eat what they need from the foods that we're providing them. And this is where I see a lot of pushback though, is like, well, what if my kid is like only ever eating bread and not eating vegetables and not eating fruit, or not eating all the foods that diet culture tells us is necessary or are necessary to be healthy? And that's where I see a lot of discomfort start to come up. And so sometimes as parents, I think there's this like subtle, again, like hidden agenda that if I can like integrate some like basic health information or nutrition facts with my kids, then maybe that will influence them to want to try some of these different foods. And again, it's done with the best intention. I totally see that. And at the same time, there can be some negative ramifications from our attempt to do that. And, I want you to also like step back and see the big picture. Oftentimes when we've had a rough history with food ourselves and we're learning how to trust our bodies again, and sometimes, you're doing that alongside feeding your own children, right? Like I know you might be healing your relationship with food as you're learning to raise an intuitive eater. And sometimes that can feel a little bit sticky, because you're trying to figure out how to listen to and trust your own body while also extending that trust to your own child. And trust, I really feel like trust is at the heart of this, where if we are not yet able to fully trust ourselves to eat and to eat in a manner that feels supportive and life-giving to us, then it can be really challenging and really difficult to extend trust to our children. And yet, our children, so much of their ability to eat intuitively hinges on our ability to trust them. I know it can feel kind of like a catch-22, like, whoa, what do I do here? And I promise you, you're not stuck. You're not doing anything wrong. I just want you to look and see at the bigger picture of what's happening here. And again, sometimes when we can step back, it helps us see like, that is why I'm reacting like this. Or maybe that's why I'm leaning on XYZ approach because, you're figuring it out. And it's hard. I'm telling you, like, this is not easy, and it's made even more difficult when we're encountering so much diet culture. Gosh, it just seems so loud right now. And so I really just want to encourage you to go gently with yourself and be as compassionate towards yourself as possible. And again, like, I think in some shape or form, many of us have considered or thought about or even engaged in health or nutrition conversations with our kids in effort to support them. Like, you're doing it with good intention. And if it hasn't happened in your home, it's probably happened in your child's classroom or on a show that they've watched. I know when my older kids, when they were little, they used to watch Pete the Cat. And wow, there was so much diet culture in there where, the characters would tell them, oh, you can't eat too much of that because it's not healthy for you, or that's too much sugar, or you need to take a bite of vegetables. Like, it is everywhere. And it's so hard. It's so hard. And so please be compassionate with yourself as you're listening and exploring some of these topics. But going back to our question for today, like, is it imperative to teach our kids about nutrition? And does providing nutrition information actually help our kids make better choices when it comes to food and their bodies? And again, I know this is not a popular stance here, what I'm about to say, but I really feel that teaching kids about nutrition and, I'm saying this in air quotes, like healthy eating, often does more harm than good. And I want to share 5 reasons why. And I know we're not going to have enough time to explore this topic in full today. And so today I just want to talk about reasons why we don't need to talk to our kids about nutrition or health in order to support them in having a healthy relationship with food. And then next week, I hope you come back for part 2 of this conversation, where I do want to share alternative things that you can do. Because again, I hear a lot of parents saying, all right, I don't want to create more harm than good. So I don't, if we're not going to talk about nutrition or we're not going to talk about healthy eating, then what can I do? What is more supportive of my child's health and their overall relationship with food in their body? So we will definitely be talking about that next week. But today, I just want to give you some reasons and some things to explore and just get curious about. And again, this is just my opinion, and I certainly don't know everything in the world whatsoever, and I'm never want to position myself in that way, and just sharing my opinion and especially just like this anecdotal evidence of seeing the impact that this has had on so many families that I've worked with and moms that I've worked with who remember like just being influenced by nutrition information and how that affected them down the road. So reason number 1 here, why you don't need to teach your children nutrition facts in order to support them in building a healthy relationship with food, is because nutrition facts are abstract. And our kids developmentally are very concrete thinkers, like meaning they are very literal. So one example to help kind of illustrate this here is the concept of time. I've talked about this before, but kids, time is such like an abstract topic to kids that it's hard for them to kind of like wrap their brain around it. And this is just like a funny story, but I had dropped my older daughter off at practice earlier, this past week. And my youngest daughter, who is 4, was pretty upset because she has a really close relationship with her big sister, and she really wanted to hang out with big sissy and, play with her at home. And as soon as my older daughter got out of the car, my youngest just says, "Oh, it's going to take forever to pick her up. It's going to take 2 weeks until we pick her up from practice. That's so long." And I was just kind of laughing to myself because, really her practice was like an hour and a half. But to my daughter, her way of describing that time period in the way that she knew how was 2 weeks, right? So it's kind of funny to me. Like, it just is a good illustration of how our kids have a harder time grasping what these more abstract topics like time or nutrition are fully about. They have a harder time developmentally understanding all the different nuances. And what happens is it can actually make those topics more confusing when we try to explain them. So our kids, again, developmentally are more literal thinkers until about pre-adolescent, adolescent age. So like 12, 13, 14, they can start now understanding more nuances around a lot of these abstract topics. But until then, it's really challenging for our kids to kind of wrap their brains around some of these abstract topics. And you might be thinking, well, like, isn't nutrition and isn't health more, kind of black and white? Like, isn't it like, all right, these foods are good or these foods are bad? And, my answer to that is no. Like, and we talked about this a little bit in last week's episode, but health and nutrition are actually very nuanced, like very. And, like, I have several degrees in nutrition, and there's still so much that I don't know and understand. And, I think that speaks to, again, the challenge that we are presented with when we try to explain these layered abstract topics to our children. It's just not going to translate the way that we want it to. And they will interpret things differently because their brain is trying to make sense of it in a literal way. And that is why I actually discourage talking about food in that lens of like, oh, this is healthy or this is unhealthy, because they will take those concepts very literally. And they can actually start to internalize, guilt or shame around those foods if they're categorized in very kind of polarizing terms, because their brain is trying to make sense of that information. And so, that is one reason why we want to kind of avoid these conversations. Now, I don't think this is the case forever. Like, I think as kids get older and in their teens, they may be more able to understand some of the different nuances of nutrition. And even then, I still think there's very little about actual nutrition that we need to talk to them about or explain to them. But developmentally, they will be more capable of holding some of those different abstract concepts. But especially younger kids, I definitely have seen it cause more confusion and even fear around some of those foods too. Reason number 2, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but nutrition facts are often talked about with a hidden agenda. And, we might share different, concepts or ideas about nutrition in effort to get our kids to eat a certain way or maybe try certain foods that they may not be ready to try. And I've seen this in particularly affect kids who are either more selective eaters. So like if you have a child who is more selective or who has sensory sensitivities and maybe is not eating an array of foods, which again, that's what diet culture purports. Like, you need to have an adventurous eater. You need to have a kid who willingly tries and eats a variety of different foods in order to be healthy. So that's the message that we hear. And so if you have a child who's not eating in that manner, sometimes, talking about nutrition can be an attempt to help get them to eat something that they are not currently eating. The problem with that is that, again, it's a subtle form of pressure, even though it's done with good intention. And what we see from research is that when children feel pressured to eat, it actually increases selectiveness and it increases the risk of them becoming more aversive to the foods that we're trying to get them to eat. And so you can see how this can become a really vicious kind of cycle. I also see it impacting children who show naturally just a higher interest in food. The reason for that is that, by society standards and by diet culture standards, we can feel uncomfortable when our child has a larger appetite, or if you have a child in a larger body who also has a higher interest in food, sometimes that can bring up discomfort. And so, oftentimes we subtly serve up nutrition facts with this hidden agenda. Well, maybe if I tell them that this food, too much of it is going to make them sick or too much of it isn't good, maybe that will kind of discourage them from eating more. And really, we do that in effort to manage our own discomfort around that. However, it can really interfere with our child's kind of innate intuitive abilities. And so sometimes, again, the nutrition facts and the desire to share them with our kids is a hidden agenda. It's a vehicle for our hidden agenda. And again, this can really backfire when it comes to feeding our kids. Okay, so reason number 3 why we want to consider avoiding teaching our kids nutrition facts is simply because nutrition facts tend to oversimplify health and nutrition anyway. So this can, again, create a lot of unrealistic expectations around what we think our kids need to eat. So an example of this is I often hear, and again, no shame if you've done this whatsoever. This is just a space for us to talk about this and explore this and to understand, if we can do it differently. But going back to my example, I've heard people say, well, if you tell kids that, for example, carrots are good for their eyes, or, eating fish is helpful for their heart, things like that, that it might support them, again, in eating those foods. And I understand the intention. However, it very much and grossly oversimplifies food and the role that food plays in our lives. Because, sometimes we just eat things because they're pleasurable and enjoyable and not because there's a particular nutrient in that specific food. And we have to remember too that our kids, especially when they're so closely connected to their innate intuitive eating abilities, are not making food decisions based on what they think they should be eating. It's more what they're feeling and experiencing in their body and what they're needing. And so, the other thing is that I think it can create a lot of misinterpretation around, what food is really. And I think, another thing here is that it can create kind of a dissonance about why we're eating certain foods or what the role of certain foods in our lives. And ultimately, the fact is that there are a wide variety of nutrients available to us in many, many different foods, and there are overlapping nutrients in different foods. So, for example, when we say, oh, we should eat our carrots, they help our eyesight because they have beta carotene. The truth is that nutrient, beta carotene, is actually available in a variety of other foods outside of just carrots. I don't really know how that started or why we narrow it down to one specific nutrient to one specific food. And again, I think it has to do with that hidden agenda. If I can tell my kid that, oh, this food will make them strong, or it'll help their eyesight, or, give them energy, again, with good intention. However, in the process, it's oversimplifying the role of food in our life because we're going to get the nutrients that we need from a variety of other different foods. And there are so many overlapping foods that provide similar nutrients, both macronutrients and micronutrients. And again, it negates the pleasurable and enjoyable aspect that food should be, sometimes, again, like we choose to eat something simply because of the pleasure that it gives us, not necessarily because like, oh, I need to eat this because I need this one specific nutrient. And again, that can create a lot of confusion for children who are just learning about food and learning how to eat and learning what feels best in their bodies. And we don't want to create unrealistic expectations around what we think our kids should eat based on this narrow view of what we've been told, quote, good nutrition actually is. And, the truth is that we generally tend to get the nutrients that our bodies need, especially kids. Kids tend to get the nutrients that their bodies need over the course of time from many different foods. And I've seen even in kids who are more selective still be able to get the nutrients that their bodies need from the, handful of foods that they may be comfortable eating. So again, like when we try to preach or teach nutrition facts, it really does oversimplify what health and nutrition is. It's much more complex than what we make it out to be. And when we try to, really kind of dumb it down to one nutrient per one food, that can create a lot of misunderstanding. It can also make kids who are more anxious eaters, again, feel aversive to eating foods because there's pressure there. Again, like, oh, I need to eat this or I'm not going to be strong. That can, again, feel like pressure and cause them to build some negative associations around that food. So generally, that's why it can be helpful to avoid going down that route. Reason number 4 here, when this is a big one, is nutrition facts. When we try to teach those or share them with our kids, it can really undermine their inherent intuitive eating abilities. So sometimes, again, like it's really important to understand what are the hidden messages that our kids are picking up on when they hear us talking about food or talking about nutrition or eat this, don't eat that, eat more of this, eat less of that. Sometimes that message that they're picking up on is that we don't trust them to eat certain foods, or we would prefer if they ate some things over others. And this is where a lot of rigidity can start to form around food, but also a child can start to build, like their sense of worth based on our approval of what they eat or what they don't eat, right? It creates like a division in their mind. And when they start to eat for more external reasons versus internal reasons, it puts them out of touch with their body's cues. And they can start to form rules about some of those foods instead of listening to their own body as the best expert of what they need. So this can be really muddied water. And again, it's always important to examine not just our intention, but the impact of some of our approaches, because it is done with good intention. However, this often really does pit a child against their own cues, right? Like if they're like, well, I really want to eat this and I enjoy eating this and I feel safe eating this, but I hear that it's not healthy for me. It's those hidden messages that we're communicating, and they're often coming right underneath the nutrition facts. They kind of go hand in hand, unfortunately, which is why teaching a child about nutrition can be really tricky. So last one here is another big one too, and I'll just talk through this really quickly, but nutrition facts don't really always honor experience. And experience is such a big part of learning how to eat intuitively. And hear me out, like kids are born, we were all born with the innate ability to self-regulate our intake. And somewhere along the line, that can get jeopardized, that can get challenged, that can become murky, where we feel like I can't trust my body anymore, or we disassociate from our body in effort to preserve or stay safe. I mean, there's so many different reasons why we disconnect from our body's cues. However, we were all born with them, and our kids have them more intact, right? Like they have those innate intuitive eating abilities that are there. And I think there's this misconception that we have to teach our kids how to eat intuitively. And this is actually a big myth about raising intuitive eaters, that I will definitely be talking more about. But we don't have to teach our kids how to eat intuitively. They are already born with those abilities. What we do need to do is trust them to eat and focus on our jobs with feeding. So this doesn't mean that we just let our kids, have free reign of the fridge and the pantry and just like kind of fend for themselves. It's much more nuanced than that. And there are definitely jobs and responsibilities that we have as parents when it comes to feeding our kids. And the more that we can focus on doing our jobs with feeding and trusting our kids to do their part with eating, the more we are able to help them preserve the intuitive eating abilities that they already have. So again, sometimes I think we feel this pressure of like, oh man, I gotta teach my child how to eat in a certain way. But again, like you have to remind yourself that your child already has those innate intuitive eating abilities. And what they actually need is they need more learning experiences. Like we learn through experience and through practice. Like if you think about when you learn to ride a bike or when your kiddo learned how to ride a bike, right? It takes a lot of practice. It takes experience to know, like, okay, what do the handlebars feel like? What do the brakes feel like? Or I need to put the brakes on when I feel that I'm starting to go too fast. Like we can verbally teach our kids those concepts, but until they actually experience it, do they learn how to do it, right? The same is so true and very parallel with food and with eating. I think we have this idea that, I can just teach my kids like verbally, like what to eat, what not to eat, what to stay away from. And that will be the guiding force that they need. But again, they don't need those verbal lectures from us to learn how to eat. What they actually need are repeated opportunities in safe, non-judgmental spaces that allow them to learn how to self-regulate and how to eat in accordance with what their bodies need. And so this is a really big one, again, because this is where I think this idea of like teaching kids about nutrition and food, like it kind of like goes on the coattails here of wanting to raise an intuitive eater in effort to help them with the process. But again, what they need most from us is trust, like trust in them to learn, to figure it out, and this kind of crosses the line here with different ideas and concepts, but just to touch on it briefly, like sometimes it's easy to say things to our kids like, oh, don't eat too much of that. Are you going to feel sick? Or you need to eat more. You need to eat more. I don't think you ate enough. You're going to be hungry later. And sometimes like we innately do know those things to be true, but our child hasn't experienced it for themselves to learn that for themselves, right? Like it's one thing for them to hear those things from us, and it's an entirely different thing for them to actually experience it and to figure out like, oh, I did eat too much of that and I don't feel good. That gives them data and information to help inform all their future eating experiences. And we kind of rob them from that when we're always trying to, interject with our ideas of eating and food and health and nutrition. Like all those ideas and concepts that we have are again, largely influenced by our experiences around food individually. And you have to remember that experiences are highly individual. What your experience around food in your body has not yet been your child's or isn't your child's experience. And we want to provide them those safe, again, non-judgmental spaces where they can learn, they can experience eating in different settings, eating different foods, right? Like we provide that to them, and that's part of our job, is offering them food and trusting them to eat what they need from the foods that we've provided, and providing them a reliable and flexible kind of structure around food and eating. So I know I'm kind of just touching the surface on that last point right there, and there's certainly a lot more that we can talk about. I just wanted to highlight again how teaching nutrition facts alone do not honor experience, and bodily experience is such a key component to learning how to self-regulate, to eating intuitively, to having a positive relationship with food, to learning to trust your body as the best expert of what you need. And that this just reminds me of something that happened recently, but it was after dinner one night, and my youngest wasn't feeling well after dinner. And she said, I think I ate too much, Mama. My tummy hurts. And I just reminded her, and, I think I remember being told things like, you shouldn't have ate too much. You ate too much. Like, you overdid it. You should have left food on your plate. Like, I remember hearing those things as a kid when I was little. And so I wanted to use that as an opportunity to, again, like, challenge that old narrative and rewrite the narrative for my daughter. And I just told her, I was like, you know what, honey, I'm so sorry. Sometimes, our tummy hurts. And you know what? You can trust your body to help you feel better soon. What should we do? Do you want to go snuggle on the couch? Do you want to go read a book? Your body is going to help you feel better. We can trust our bodies. And it was like almost like a balm to my inner child who needed to hear those things too and never did. And it just reminds me, like, so often we try to interject with our information and our facts and all the things that diet culture tells us that we need to be doing to raise a healthy child. And in reality, it's like, remembering that your child's body like already has so much innate wisdom, and so much of this is leaning into trust and allowing them the experience. Like, we could talk, say all the things in the world, but that will never translate into lived experience for your child to actually learn and have opportunity to figure that out for themselves. So definitely there's a lot of nuance there that we can chat more about. But I hope that this helped just give you some things to think about when it comes to nutrition facts and understanding the role that this plays, if any, in raising a child to have a healthy relationship with food in their body. And I hope it also just helps alleviate some pressure from you too. Again, I think as parents, we often feel this pressure of all the things that we need to be doing and teaching our kids. And I hope it just, again, takes some of that off your shoulders to realize, like, you don't need to integrate nutrition facts into your home curriculum to raise a healthy child. And in fact, kind of leaving that off the table will actually give your child more space to learn how to eat in a way that feels best for them. And I know we covered a lot today. And like I said, I hope you come back next week. I'm going to be sharing just some ideas of what you can do instead. So, if teaching kids about nutrition is off the table, well, what can I do? Or what is helpful for my kids at this stage that just continues to support the healthy relationship with food that they're building, that's not entrenched or ingrained in diet culture or any of diet culture's hidden agendas. So definitely come back next week. I hope you can join, and I will be sharing some ideas for you then. In the meantime, I would love to hear from you. If anything from today's episode resonated with you, or you have questions, or you have thoughts or concerns or anything at all, I would love to hear from you. So please feel free to connect with me via email. I'm over at hello@crystalcargis.com. You can also send me a DM on Instagram. I am also there at Crystal Cargis. Thank you so much, as always, for taking some time to hang out with me. And I am just so proud of you and every brave step that you're taking in rewriting the narrative around food and bodies in your home. You are doing such a brave thing, Mama. All right, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lift the Shame podcast. For more tips and guidance on your motherhood journey, come connect with me on Instagram at Crystal Cargis. Until next week, Mama, I'll be cheering you on. Bye for now.